Jackson Reed never liked cities, and cities never liked him back. That was fine. After 30 years working in hydrology, water engineering, and environmental modeling, he retired early and moved out to the family land his grandfather left him, 70 acres of gently sloping woods. In Shoreline on Lake Atoka in central Texas, it was the kind of place people dreamed about when they were stuck in traffic or suffocating under concrete. For Jackson, it wasn't just peace, it was balance. A year ago, he'd taken a contract job in Alaska, consulting on glacier-fed water systems and emergency flood routing. The money was good, and he'd left the land in trust with a local management firm, assuming everything would stay as it was. It didn't. He came back in May to find the world tilted sideways. As the rental truck rolled down the gravel road toward the lake, he first saw the fences, then the freshly paved asphalt. Then the shimmering white condominiums, rows of identical sterile boxes on stilts, lined up like teeth along the shoreline. It felt like someone had built a shopping mall on his soul. 66 of them. Number was printed on the banner hanging across the entrance, Lake Atoka Residences -66 luxury waterfront. Units starting at $799,000. He stopped the truck, turned off the engine, and just stared. Jackson knew exactly where the property lines were. The land had been surveyed 3 times since the 80s, but HOA developers, he soon discovered, had used a legal loophole. A failed land annexation in 2019 left a slice of his property, the part closest to the lake, in a jurisdictional gray area. And while he was gone, the Atoka Hills HOA quietly filed an emergency development permit through a neighboring municipality. Using falsified plat maps and a rush zoning request, they built fast. Modular construction. 3D printed supports. Pre-approved environmental impact reports rubber-stamped by a consultant who never set foot on the land. No one from the county ever called him. The HOA board chair, a grinning man named Howard Seaver, met him at the gate. "Mr. Reed, I understand this is a bit of a surprise," Howard said, running out his hand like a man offering a handshake before a punch. "But I assure you, all permits are in place. You were absent, and the law accommodates necessary development. It's progress. We believe in coexistence." Jackson didn't shake his hand. Instead, he walked the edge of the new development. Every step felt like a trespass. They'd torn out the native willow and cedar. They'd paved over the floodplain. Artificial levees hemmed in runoff channels like a dam holding back inevitability. It was all wrong. He climbed down to the edge of the lake. The water was calm now, but he knew that wouldn't last. Not with the way the climate was shifting. Not with the lake's upstream saturation levels already nearing maximum capacity. An El Niño pushing heavier storm bands across the region. He squatted, fingers in the mud. The waterline was a full 4 inches higher than normal for this time. Of year they had no idea what they'd done. To Howard and the HOA, it was just a prime waterfront investment. To Jackson, it was a desecration and a ticking time bomb. He didn't shout, he didn't sue, not yet. Instead, that night he unpacked the old server from his basement, a squat, humming cube of wires and rust. He cleared a space in the cabin's back room, powered it up, and logged into something he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. The terminal blinked, NAID system, B. 3.44, ready awaiting hydrological input. He smiled, grim and silent. If they wanted to play God with the land, he would let nature answer. Jackson had always believed that water was the most honest element. Fire lied, it dazzled, danced, made people believe they had control until it devoured everything. Air could be manipulated, redirected, trapped. Earth could be reshaped, built upon, sculpted. But water? Water remembered. It followed gravity, obeyed no borders, and reclaimed what was hers in time. That's what made it dangerous, and what made Jackson respected. He'd spent most of his professional life studying how water moved through the world, not just on the surface but beneath it, through porous limestone aquifers, along fractured bedrock seams, down ancient runoff channels that no longer appeared on modern maps. His work with the Army Corps of Engineers in the early 2000s had taken him from hurricane-battered coasts to neglected urban floodplains. But what set him apart wasn't just his technical skill. It was NAID. NAID wasn't supposed to exist back in 2014. Jackson had started coding a personal project after hours, a water behavior AI designed to simulate not only hydrodynamic movement, but the socio-environmental impact of water shifts over time. Most models could tell you where water would flow if it rained an inch. NAID could tell you what happens if it rains an inch every third Tuesday for 5 years, accounting for changes in soil absorption, wind patterns, urban runoffs, even policy changes. It was predictive, adaptive, quietly dangerous in the right hands. He never published the final version. The federal agencies weren't ready for something that could challenge their flood maps. A private company once tried to buy it. He declined and buried the system deep in his archives. Now, sitting at the same desk his grandfather had built by hand, Jackson watched as NAID flickered back to life. It felt like talking to an old friend, one who knew exactly how things could go wrong. He uploaded the topographical scans he'd taken that morning using a drone, overlaid with weather satellite data, soil density reports, construction schematics scraped from the public permitting site. The condos were built with minimal setback from the lake, perched on concrete stilts, driven just 8 feet into unstable silty clay. The so-called smart drainage system was little more than a pair of angled culverts and a stormwater retention tank already 30% full, according to recent maintenance logs. NAIA processed for several minutes, then began plotting. Blue lines traced overflow paths, red zones spread across the eastern quarter of the condo layout like blood from a fresh wound. Then the system generated its first timeline, projected flood vulnerability. Index, 87.2% critical estimated. Structural failure, 3 to 5 months under current conditions. Trigger, 5.7 inches cumulative rainfall within a 72-hour period. Confidence, 93.6%. Jackson leaned back in his chair. 5.7 inches in 3 days wasn't theoretical. It had happened 3 times in the last decade. And with early summer storm cells forming across the Gulf, it was almost guaranteed to happen again. It's likely sooner than anyone expected. He tapped a few keys and brought up the full 3D flood progression model. It showed the water creeping in, curling under the elevated walkways, saturating the soil until the stilts lost traction. One by one, the units began to tilt, then fracture. Not a flash flood, a slow, relentless swallowing. And yet the rest of the land, his land, remained untouched. The channels he had restored years ago, the native vegetation, the gentle slope away from the shoreline, it all worked. Nature knew how to manage herself when left alone. He saved the model, encrypted it, and stored it across 3 separate drives. He could warn them again, he supposed. Send a report, hold a press conference. But he knew what would happen. Dismissals, legal threats, maybe even an injunction claiming he was interfering with private infrastructure. They had chosen profit over prudence now. They'd get the lesson. He tried to teach a decade ago, delivered by the one force no HOA could intimidate. Water by the second week of June. The air had changed. The birds nested higher in the trees. The wind carried more weight. Jackson watched the clouds as if they were old colleagues, scanning their formation and movement like data points on a live feed. He could feel the storm coming, not from some mystic intuition, but from experience. The land was speaking, and he knew how to listen. He spent his mornings walking the perimeter of his property with a small field tablet, checking soil saturation, humidity, and root movement. In the afternoons, he made quiet modifications. To an untrained eye, it looked like gardening. A bit of trenching here, a reshaping of a berm there, some brush clearing, some native sedge planted along a runoff path. But everything was calculated. He wasn't redirecting the flood. He was giving it back its ancient map. Dozens of tiny channels, long erased by development, were now reopened. He didn't cut them wide, just enough for water to remember the way. The berms would slow flow, encouraging soil absorption, while the rewilded vegetation would stabilize loose ground and feed the microbial systems that helped resist erosion. His plan wasn't to protect his land, it was already protected. Goal now was to make sure the water moved how it always wanted to, which meant it would move through the condo development. He avoided the HOA workers when possible. There were still landscaping teams coming and going, installing synthetic turf, sealing driveways, testing out LED mood lights along the waterfront decks. It was surreal. They were building illusions while standing in the path of certainty. One morning, as he was reinforcing an old culvert on the eastern edge, a black SUV with no plates pulled up beside the road. A woman stepped out, sharp blazer, city boots, a tablet in her hand. She didn't introduce herself at first. "You're Mr. Reed," she said, scanning him like she already knew the answer. He nodded and kept working, shoveling gravel over the drainage mesh. "I work with the HOA's legal counsel," she continued. "We've received concerns that you're modifying flood infrastructure on land adjacent to the condo project." He paused, looked up at her. "I'm restoring natural terrain," he said evenly, "on private property. That restoration has the potential to influence runoff behavior toward our clients' units." He smiled, the kind of smile that has no warmth. "Then your clients should have considered that before they built on a floodplain they didn't own." She tapped something on her tablet. "I need to inform you that any action which demonstrably alters hydrological patterns in a way that causes damage to surrounding properties can result in civil or even criminal liability under." He cut her off. Texas Water Code, Chapter 11, Section 9. "I know. I also know that according to subsection B, natural runoff returning to historical paths is not considered artificial interference. Feel free to cite that in your report." She blinked. That wasn't the response she'd prepared for. "Have a good day," he added, and turned back to his shovel. She stood there a moment longer, then left. That night, he ran NIAD again. The latest satellite data showed a tropical disturbance over the Yucatan, forming into a low-pressure system. NIAD crunched the probabilities. Storm event ETA, 6.4 days. Cumulative rainfall estimate, 7.3 inches. He uploaded the model to a private link, buried behind a wall of encrypted routing proxies, and sent it to one recipient, an old colleague at the Texas Climate Analysis Network. No message. Just the data. If anyone could sound the alarm publicly, it was him. Jackson wasn't looking for vindication, just verification. The storm was coming. The flood protocol had begun. He poured himself a mug of black coffee, stood on the back porch, and listened. The frogs had gone silent. Even nature was waiting. The first drops came just after midnight. Light, rhythmic, almost polite, the kind of rain that lulled people to sleep, made them believe it would pass by morning. But Jackson didn't sleep. He sat in his cabin's back room, lit by the dull glow of NIAD's interface. Watching the data feed change in real time, the storm system had shifted slightly west. Not enough to dodge the lake, but enough to ensure the heaviest rainfall would settle right over the Atoka watershed, Ain had recalculated. Cumulative rainfall? Estimate, 8.1 inches in 60 hours. Ground absorption threshold breached in 16 hours, predicted structural compromise of Lakeside units. 63%, time to failure onset. 22 hours. Jackson leaned back, hands clasped behind his head. No celebration, no vindication, just inevitability. He minimized the forecast window and opened a secondary script, his pirate stream. For weeks, he'd been quietly transmitting an anonymized version of NIAD simulations to an open source server used by university researchers and independent environmental scientists. It didn't include the HOA name, the condo coordinates, or any direct accusations, just raw data, topography, rainfall, flow vectors, and high-risk zones. A warning for anyone smart enough to read it. Now, the stream was live. Bright red overlays lit up the development zone like a flare. Outside, the rain intensified. By mid-morning, the sky was a solid gray mass. The lake had swallowed the lowest portions of the shore walk. Artificial turf rippled like a cheap rug under puddles. The HOA landscapers, still clinging to denial, dug temporary trenches, and set up portable pumps. But the water wasn't coming. In one direction, it was surrounding them. By noon, 2 condo residents posted shaky phone videos of ankle-deep water seeping into their waterproof garages. One video went viral. The HOA scrambled to delete comments, issue press releases about minor drainage overflow and extreme but manageable weather. Jackson didn't watch the coverage. He watched NAIA. The algorithm wasn't emotional. It didn't care about property values or public perception. It simply followed the laws of water. By 3 p.m., the foundation failure began. Unit 14B, built. On the southeast corner, closest to the rewilded flood path, tilted just enough to crack the structural supports. Footage captured by a drone showed it slowly sinking on one side, the stilts collapsing as the soil beneath turned to slurry. Out. Engineers arrived in raincoats in panic. The HOA issued an evacuation notice, not mandatory, but strongly advised.
Only
Half of the residents left by dusk. 5 more units were compromised. The emergency retention tank overflowed, sending a silent torrent downhill, not toward the lake, but around it, where Jackson's channels caught it and redirected it through. The original runoff path, the water moved in graceful arcs, flowing downhill past native grass and clay culverts, and straight into the condo complex's foundation grid. The lights went out in 3 buildings just after 7 p.m. Electrical systems shorted from saturation. NAIA showed a 94% probability of catastrophic collapse for 10 more units overnight. Jackson made no moves, no announcements, no interviews. This wasn't revenge. This was water doing what water did. By midnight, emergency services had blockaded the area. News choppers hovered overhead. The next morning's headlines would be full of phrases like unexpected flood event, permitting irregularities, and structural oversight. But Jackson just stood on his porch, drinking coffee as the rain lightened. His cabin stood dry. His land held firm. Even the frogs had returned. Nye blinked softly behind him. System report complete. Flood sequence concluded. No lawsuits. Number. Speeches. Just the quiet, relentless restoration of balance nature had spoken. 3 weeks later, the sun returned. But the scars remained. The 66 condo development was now a half-drowned skeleton. Mud coated the walkways. Cracked stilts jutted from the earth at odd angles like broken bones. Several of the units had buckled entirely, sagging into each other, their once pristine facades mottled with algae and stress fractures. Insurance agents circled the wreckage with clipboards and drones. The HOA's emergency committee pitched tents in what had been the parking lot. Their logo banners now sagging and water dash stained. Most of the residents had evacuated for good. A few held out, bitter and confused, wandering through the ruins in galoshes and rain ponchos, still clinging to the illusion that this was just a freak event, that someone, anyone, could be held accountable. Preferably someone not named the HOA board. But the deeper truth was surfacing, slowly and unmistakably. The permits had been forged. The zoning approvals were rushed through during Jackson's absence, using doctored land surveys and ghost signatures. The contractor who approved the environmental impact statement had never even visited Lake Atoka, and the floodplain warnings that Jackson had documented in public records years ago. Ignored, buried, redacted in some cases. Now, federal investigators were involved. State regulators arrived with full teams. The media began asking sharper questions. Lawsuits started stacking like sandbags. And through it all, Jackson kept quiet. His land had weathered the flood perfectly. The restored native channels carried the excess water away from his structures. His cabin, his trees, his outbuildings untouched. Not 1 inch of erosion where it didn't belong. Every step he had taken to return the land to its natural flow had been vindicated. The land hadn't fought the water, it had cooperated with it. That was the difference. A regional journalist showed up one morning asking for an interview. She called it a modern David versus Goliath story. Jackson declined. This wasn't a fight, he said simply. It was a correction. Still, word got out. the anonymous data stream Jackson had launched, NAIAD's real-time flood simulations, had been traced back to him by a group of university researchers who recognized the structure of the code. They reached out, not to expose him, but to collaborate. They wanted to make NAIAD open source, to use it as a tool for communities resisting irresponsible development in flood-prone regions. Jackson hesitated at first. He wasn't in this for fame or to become a public figure. But after some thought, he agreed. NAIAD had done what it was built to do. Now it could do more. A week later, the NAIAD